Go ahead, Marion, please.
All right. Chapter 5, Illumination and Aldous Huxley. I would like to emphasize that the little spiritual experiences in Chapter 3 are nothing compared with the awe-inspiring revelations of the path, such as when a man finds himself standing out in space, watching the planets whirling by. It is only in these tremendous cosmic illuminations that a man is conscious of his essential oneness with the universe. Once a man has experienced even a glimpse of the infinite spirit and the peace that passeth all understanding, he will live but with the aim to make such a state of illumination permanent. There is the story told by Bhagwan Hamsa in The Holy Mountain, and there's an asterisk, translated by Sri Pirojit Swami, published by Macmillan, London, 1934. So there is the story told by Bhagwan Hamsa in The Holy Mountain, in which he tells of his pilgrimage to see the Lord, and unite with the divine soul, or die. He climbed up to the frozen lake of Gwarakund, 20,000 feet above the sea. There he remained for 3 nights and 3 days. It was to be death or realization for him. He was without food or shelter in the icy, snow-covered wilderness. The initiation of the self, the infinite self, took place. Bhagwan wrote of it, "I found myself reflected everywhere in the whole universe. It was one harmony, full of wisdom, infinite love, perennial, and bliss eternal." The aspirant, whether he is consciously or unconsciously aware, will get what he requires for his advancement according to his disposition and propensities. Path experiences are the same everywhere, no matter what faith we may belong to, or when or where we live. Eastern and Western mysticism have always taught the ultimate union of man with his divine soul, that part of him which belongs to the oversoul or infinite spirit. But it is not generally recognized that self-realization can only be attained within the trammels of the flesh. According to Meher Baba's teaching, only on our planet and in our physical body can we arrive at ultimate union with the oversoul or God. An examination of the esoteric teachings in comparative religion reveals a common substratum. For the laws of life that govern man and creation must be the same in everything and everywhere. It is astonishing to note that members of different religions do not comprehend the fundamental structure and basis of all life. Unfortunately, bigotry and fanaticism take the place of reason and logic as the years go by, and the inner truths and inner realities are forgotten or become perverted or misrepresented. I cannot leave this subject without describing what I understand to be the greatest of all the initiations, the I am God initiation. Here I will quote directly from my book, Civilization or Chaos. A friend, who is an American, told me about this tremendous spiritual event. He is a highly advanced man, probably nearing the end of his journey through creation. Quote, The initiation lasted 3 days and 3 nights and very nearly killed him, for his physical vehicle had not been, quote, stepped up to the high rate of frequency required for such a state of cosmic awareness, or, as the masters say, the time was not yet ripe for the final consummation. He told me that it was the most marvelous, but at the same time, the most terrifying initiation of his life. He felt that at any moment, his body might be torn asunder, bursting with the cosmic strain imposed upon it. It felt as if it were being pulled out in all directions, being stretched out to the uttermost, as if it could not contain the life and rush of the spirit. In this greatest of all initiations, bordering on self-realization, which, according to Meher Baba, cannot be fully accomplished without the aid of a perfect master, close paren, my friend knew that he sustained everything, that he was in everything, that he gave life to everything, and that he loved everything. He felt that the sun, the moon, planets, and stars were all coming out of him, and that reality was neither good nor bad, but existence. He saw the whole immense universe dwindle like a speck on his being. It was as if he could put his finger on it and wipe it out. End of quotation. When a man reaches this cosmic state of illumination and is transcending creation, he then knows the universe to be but an illusion or Maya, and it vanishes as the morning mist. My friend might easily have died, but now, provided he meets a perfect master, he should, in all probability, become self-realized in the coming awakening of the spirit. In Meher Baba's discourses, it is explained that the whole universe is in the self and springs into existence from a tiny point in the self, which is referred to as Om. But the self has become habituated to gathering experiences through one medium or other, and therefore it comes to experience the universe as a formidable rival other than itself. Those who have realized God and regained consciousness of the universe, means Sadguru or perfect master, can see it constantly as springing from the Om point, which is in everyone. Close quote. Those who have had the, quote, I am God initiation in all its fullness and completeness, and at the same time are able to retain the gross or earth consciousness, have the authority to call themselves God. That is why Meher Baba's Muslim master, Babajan, would call herself God. The constant affirmation that she was God and the source of everything so enraged some Orthodox soldiery of a Baluchi regiment that they buried her alive. She used supernormal powers to effect her escape, and the same soldiers were astonished some years later to find her safe and well, holding court amongst her devotees at Pune. I do not feel I can end this chapter without some comments on some of Aldous Huxley's writings. It is indeed very strange that the author of The Perennial Philosophy, published by Chatto and Windus, London, 1946, should have so little comprehension of the subject of his little book, Heaven and Hell, especially as he helped to found the Californian Vedanta group under the aegis of Swami Prabhavananda. Yet in this book, Mr. Huxley is preoccupied with the idea that perception can be the same as revelation. No doubt psychic power can be stimulated under certain conditions by hypnotism, the stroboscopic lamp and drugs, and the medium in question may find himself at what Mr. Huxley calls the antipodes of his normal consciousness. It is also obvious that this other world may take on the conventional characteristics of the traditional biblical heaven and hell. And it is also well known that these visions or thought forms can change in a flash to the opposite results if negative emotions should arise. But the astral worlds of which Mr. Huxley writes only belong to the lower semi-subtle spheres of consciousness and bear no relation whatever to the transcendental states in the higher realms of soul experience, which are completely unaffected by drugs or any other form of excitation. He also seems to understand nothing of the nature of thought forms. I cannot go into fuller details of the misleading impression which this book conveys. But if the reader is interested, he will find some of the issues partially clarified in the appendices of my book. However, the most serious aspect of all is Mr. Huxley's irresponsible suggestions that aspiring mystics should try drugs, etc., for stimulation in spiritual perception. As if we do not have enough of drug addiction in our times. It is indeed difficult to reconcile this ideal with Mr. Huxley's ethical preoccupations. He seems bent on defeating what one thought was his main interest in furthering the spiritual qualities of man as an antidote to the prevailing materialistic tendencies of our day.
Oh, here's a good spot to change readers. Gloria, please.
If one turns to Mr. Huxley's previous little book, The Doors of Perception, which has also been much criticized, one finds that as a literally third verse, it's superb. But again, the poverty of his comprehension is evident. He does not seem to be able to realize that his experiences of heightened visual impressions after taking mescaline bear no relation whatever to genuine mystical experiences. In fact, it is not difficult for a good sensitive to feel what he did without the aid of mescaline. Yet, he has the temerity to compare his interesting little sensation with what he thinks Adam saw, quote, on the morning of his creation, end quote. There, again, Mr. Huxley shows no understanding of Adam's transcendental experience when he became God-realized. From the Bible, we glean that Adam was not the first, in between quotes, first man. He was only called the first man because he was a God-realized man. For after his attainment of self-realization, he became, quote, I am God, end quote. Thus realizing the great mystery of life, the great secret that heaven and earth are one. Though disunited objectively and consciously, they are nevertheless united subjectively and unconsciously, for the human form is the highest evolved physical form, just as human consciousness is the highest evolved consciousness, which needs to be turned away from duality to unity or oneness in order to achieve self-realization. Yet, Mr. Huxley seems to think that just a few drops of mescaline could help him to reach near to the ultimate goal. To my mind, the most revealing bit on his book is when, on being asked to look into his head, that is to say, to find out what was going on his own mind, Mr. Huxley admits that the inner landscape is, quote, curiously unrewarding, end quote, and he finds only cheap structures of stuff looking like enamel, tin, and plastics. In fact, he found the contents of his mind, quote, quote, cheap and, quote, quote, trivial, like the articles displayed in a, between quotes, 5 and dime store. I wonder if Mr. Huxley's higher self was endeavoring to register disappointment that his personal contribution to the higher metaphysics of our spiritual being had been so fruitless. Yet, again, Mr. Huxley claims that under the influence of mescaline, end of parent, he had known contemplation as its height, but admittedly not its fullness. These words are so staggering in their implications that I can only refer again to the poverty of the author's mind, so graphically described by himself. According to certain traditions, man has to go through 8 million.
You might as well read that little note.
Okay. The note, if the reader is interested in this subject, he may read Professor Sachner comments on Mr. Huxley in his work Mysticism, Sacred and Profane, published by the Oxford University Press, 1957.
So that was 8 million and
8,400,000 lives in his evolved physical form before he can attain to self-realization, which then again can only be achieved through the grace of one who is already self-realized. There is an asterisk there. Again, I suggest that the reader should peruse the discourses by Meher Baba for some clarification of the dynamics of the path.
please continue.
Okay. Chapter 6, Dreaming into the Future. The year 1937 was an anxious one. Hitler was growing continuously in strength, and we were beginning to fear that another war was on its way. It was early that year when I had the following dreams regarding the import of our future. In the first, Gerald and I were standing outside our house, looking up into the sky above a London park. Away up in the blue heavens, an enormous angry-looking storm cloud was massed in cumulative waves above us. Out of it pointed the long black muzzles of 4 great guns, 2 to the east and 2 to the west, I thought. Quote, this means war, end quote. In great distress, I began to cry, for had we not come through the First World War? Then a voice spoke, quote, God has been blasphemed. He's angry. He's now going to speak, end of quote. Much perturbed, I ran into the house. On coming out again, I thought, perhaps God may be going to give a lecture. Turning to my husband, I asked, quote, well, what did God say? End of quote. It seems he was going to explain when I woke up. The following night, before falling asleep, I meditated on the dream. It was a warning, a presage of the world catastrophe to come. What was the voice of God? This question was age-old and always difficult to answer, for we really don't know. With our limited mind, the danger of deception is ever present. But if according to the dream, God was going to speak, then there must be some cosmic revelation coming. There were many who thought that another word may be the word of wars, Armageddon had yet to take place, and apart from biblical prophecies, there had been many others through the ages foretelling that stupendous events would close the 20th century. Was the word again to be made flesh? Would there be some form of divine intervention to stop man's total destruction of himself and his planet? Was that why God would have to speak? The word again made flesh as in the coming of Christ? The following night, I prayed, quote, "Dear Lord, please give me another dream. When and where?" End quote. The answer came that same night. This time I was walking quietly along the bank of a wide and peaceful river. I noticed on my path a clump of unusual white flowers, outstanding in their beauty and quality of texture, strange flowers I had never before seen. The landscape was at rest and all seemed peaceful, and I saw a few people walking about unconcernedly. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. I turned around and saw something gleaming way down the reach of the river. It was the crest of a huge tidal wave coming very slowly upstream. Good gracious, I thought, we shall all be drowned. For now, I could well see that this slowly advancing crest would in time flood all the ground that spread out in a flat expanse to the far horizon, the plains of civilization. As I searched for a means of escape, I noticed that the path symbolizing the mystic path wound way across the plain, and in distance was a pyramid-shaped hill. Quote, "We must all make for that hill. I must warn the people," end of quote. As I shouted, I woke up. Parent. In 1952, when I first visited Meher Baba's retreat at Pimpalgan, there I saw the pyramid-shaped hill of my dream, standing up close to the retreat. Parent. So these two dreams plainly indicated the catastrophe that would slowly overwhelm our present civilization. But at the same time, I understood nothing of their symbolism, especially the pyramid signifying the mystical triangle which stands for the soul's journey through creation back to its divine self or the oversoul. For as we know, the soul in itself is not part of creation, but is as much inside it as outside it, in the sense that creation is but an illusion and not reality. The white flowers on the path stood for purity, the only way that leads to the necessary purification of our consciousness if we are eventually to progress to the ultimate goal, which is our divine self. Neither had I heard of the silent master of India, nor of his message to the world that when he broke his silence, the new dispensation would come into being. To save the world, there had to be a descent of the Christ consciousness of Buddha consciousness, a new awakening of the spirit to replenish and rejuvenate our poor, tired, tortured earth. Thus, the world would again become flesh. The Second World War started in 1939. It was in the spring of 1940 that I met one of Meher Baba's disciples in London. He heard about my dreams and other experiences and explained their connection with his master. It was with great interest that I listened that Meher Baba was the avatar of our age and of the new revelation which were to come. Greatly impressed, I reflect deeply as I walk homeward across the park. It was empty. Not a soul was about, for the children had already been evacuated in anticipation of the coming blitz. Thinking about this man I have recently met, I was wondering if he was not a little. I tapped my own forehead. It was difficult to believe anything. He was surely quite bemused over this master of his. Could Meher Baba really be the Messiah, Lord of the second advent? It seemed incredible, but did we not need a new dispensation with so many living under the shadows of fear, hatred, and oppression? Millions were groaning under the totalitarian sway of dictatorship. How would this war end? How could we free these helpless people? Yet we were all to blame for the wars that scourged the earth. Was this Meher Baba genuine or just another fake Messiah? Had not Jesus said there would be antichrists?
Thanks, Gloria. Miguel, could you continue, please?
As I mused, I became aware of a strange, warm glow. It seemed to have descended from the air, or perhaps it came from within. I do not know. This seems a prosaic description, but words are not adequate. This divine radiance grew and warmed me through and through. I was caught up in what might be described as an intense mystical experience. For was I not being battered or bathed in rays of divine love, warm, palpitating vibrations pouring down from heaven? It was a much greater and more intensified experience, but similar to the initiation which took place in 1934, when I imagined that perhaps my father had brought some angels with him. So this was the direct answer to my query, straight from India. Sometime later, on seeing my new friend again, I told him what had happened and how the initiation had changed my whole life. And he remarked, quote, "This is very interesting. You had experienced indirectly what some experience when they meet Meher Baba in person for the first time." End of the quote. For several months after, there were moments when this warm, loving current seemed to pass through me on to others. It did not belong to me, but came from an outside source. I was but a channel. I have not felt it since, but I know for certain that this divine energy of love essence is going to change the world. What else could bring about the universal awakening of the heart, so sorely needed if humanity is to survive its present impasse? Chapter 7, India. The concept of the avatar or Messiah returning again and again for the redemption of man is by no means universal in Hindu philosophy, and the belief amongst Meher Baba's followers that he is the avatar of our times cannot be proved or disproved. Only time will show. Posterity will know and decide. For as we remember, the avatars are never fully recognized in their lifetime. This is therefore a very controversial subject. but the domain of popular mythology strengthens the belief that there are periods of readjusting the standards of the times. Why should not legends and folklore be evidence of real folk memory? As I pointed out in my previous book, chapter 4 on cycles and circles, Professor C.G. Jung, whose authority is unquestioned, emphasizes that in myths and religious symbols in different epochs and amongst different peoples, it is to be remarked that the same type of hero often appears, and the idea of an all-powerful being is recognized everywhere. In fact, Dr. Jung's findings suggest a supreme universal consciousness behind all things. That it may be possible for the supreme universal consciousness to incarnate in human form has been assumed in all religious thought throughout the ages. But the difficulty is how to recognize a divine incarnation except through faith and belief. In ritual drama, there remains a common basis in these different legends of past heroes who sometimes do not appear to have died in the ordinary sense. The body not being buried, so far as we know. Nevertheless, various holy scriptures or places remain as testimony to the great being who has passed away. Every nation has legends of great heroes. Also, they are to be found in prehistoric antiquity. One interesting point is that while it seemed quite possible for culture heroes to have become gods, it appears to have been comparatively rare that the gods became culture heroes. Does not this suggest avataric periods of manifestation? For the prehistoric past is thick with legends of flood heroes from different parts of the world, and why should we not surmise that some of the flood heroes may have been avatars? Again, as stated in my previous book, chapter 10, Karma, the universal divine manifestation always coincides with the spiritual renaissance of man, and does not humanity today need a spiritual rebirth? The whole world is in travail and appears to be suffering from the agony of an approaching cosmic change. Convinced as I now was of having received a message direct from India, the desire to leave for that country became overwhelming. Not that I had the slightest hope of ever getting there in the midst of a world war, but it so happened that it had been settled that I should go to South Africa to arrange for the evacuation of some young relatives. So I thought I might just as well try to get a visa for India, in case it may ever be possible later on to go from Cape Town to India. So I tried the passport office for the necessary papers. The man looked at me curiously, for apparently nobody could get a visa for India unless for some special reason. That country was going through a dangerous crisis, and unattached English woman roaming round were certainly not wanted. Seeing the way blocked, I obtained an introduction to an important official in the India office. When he asked me what I wanted to go to India for, I said boldly that I was a disciple of Meher Baba. Oh, he remarked, quote, "We do not have much to do with the saints. They can be very touchy." End of the quote. However, he told me to return, and in a few days, to my surprise, all was settled. I then caught the boat to Cape Town. The day I left, the Germans were over Southampton, and a little later, our London flat was badly bombed. On arrival at Cape Town, I was shocked to receive a letter from Mrs. Smuts informing me that my aunt had been murdered on her farm by a strange native. General and Mrs. Smuts were her neighbors at Irene, Pretoria. My aunt's husband had been killed in the First War, and her son in the Second. So she was trying to carry on alone. In the end, the children never arrived, as so many ships were being sunk that the government stopped sending children, and their mothers did not want to risk the voyage. So that problem had resolved itself, and now I found myself free to go to India, should it be possible to get there, for I had waited nearly a year for my husband to join me. He had been invalid out in the last war. I was sure that the War Office would not want his services. After a long wait, the War Office eventually decided that they did not require him. Meanwhile, the famous Battle of Britain was on. The shattered British army was being withdrawn from Belgium. It seemed almost impossible that England could be saved. General was glad to find he could be of use in welfare work amongst the troops, and so postponed his departure. Then later, the government stopped all men under 60 from leaving the country. So there was no longer any question of his being able to join me. As it was also impossible for me to return, I decided to try and get to India. While waiting at Cape Town, I met an early English woman who was clairvoyant. She astonished me by saying that she saw a beautiful Indian spirit behind me and said that his aura was pink and blue, the colors, so I understood, of very advanced men. She also told me that his name was Ramakrishna. This was very odd, as she knew nothing at all about India and its saints. And Ramakrishna
hang on.
was said to have been a God-realized man. This would have puzzled me, only I remember later the connection with Ramakrishna through my father's father-in-law, Professor Max Muller. However, there is a mistake somewhere. for I have since asked Baba about the aura, and he has explained that a God-realized man has no aura, only a halo. Therefore, it was not possible that the old lady saw Ramakrishna, since he was God-realized. Meanwhile, Baba has kindly given me a long explanation of the difference between auras and halos, which I have been privileged to make use of in Appendix 8.
Thanks, Miguel. I'll take a turn. It was not till the spring of 1941 that I managed to get the last boat from Cape Town carrying civilians to India. Steaming along the Ganges in the hottest season of the year was far from pleasant, but it was in Calcutta that I got my first impression of India. I can never forget the horror on stepping out of the hotel in the evening to find that I had to dodge the sleeping forms that encumbered the pavements. Have things improved since? The average Westerner, the moment he lands on Indian shores, is appalled by the sight of so much suffering and privation. Most animals and human beings live in a permanent state of semi-starvation. The innumerable stray, emaciated dogs and poor little skeleton-like puppies looking for homes are a pathetic sight. But worse still, so many beggars, blind and hideously deformed, also lepers. But the average Indian, born and bred amidst the sores of his country, seems to foreigners quite hardened and indifferent. Can he really help it? The difficult economic situation and problems of overpopulation are so overwhelming. Many a time when I have indignantly questioned about something or other, my friends have said apologetically that they are used to it, that they do not notice it, or else that however much they feel about it, the problem was so vast. What could one do about it? Nevertheless, the Hindus in general, those who adhere to their religion, will never kill anything. The animals know this, for they are extraordinarily tame. Also the birds and even the reptiles. When I was living at Satara, a large toad would come into the house and hop up the stairs to my bedroom. Even though I would catch him and put him back in the garden, he would come again. To see cruelty in its most hideous forms, one must go to the Muslim countries, the Arab states, where conditions are far worse, not only for animals, but for men. Justice is so primitive and violent that a thief may be punished by having his hand cut off. Something must happen to awaken the consciousness of the people of the East, that their hearts may be changed and touched by the sight of so much suffering around them. The present conditions are a disgrace, and Indians and Asians should endeavor to change them. Here should be mentioned a letter of protest from a South African Indian in the Times of India, 9th May 1957. He writes, "The sight of thousands of persons living on the pavements and alleyways, eking out a bare existence, left me wretched. But it reached its climax when I saw an elderly, starving man lying on the pavement near St. George's Hospital. He was almost dying and not a single soul took notice of him." But why should I criticize the East when we know what can happen in the West? Under the Hitler regime in Germany, 6 million innocent men, women, and children were done to death by suffocation in gas chambers. Since I wrote the above, Baba has kindly given me some explanation, and I have been allowed to incorporate this in Appendix 9. What is needed is a new form of education that aims at developing the qualities of the heart instead of only the head, not only in India, but everywhere. Here I must mention the work done along such lines by the Mira movement. The Mira schools were founded by the great humanitarian scholar, Sri T.L. Vaswani. He states, sympathy is the key to education. Intellect has been developed, but aggressively, and so has strengthened the modern cult of separation. A new education of the heart is India's piteous need. So here's a good place to continue next week. Bottom of page 93, bottom paragraph.
Okay,
Could